Cool. So we are live and online broadcasting now, guys. So as I said, we'll give the others, people who are coming in, another 60 seconds before we get started. And then we're going to try and do the impossible. We're going to try and cram, probably a whole afternoon's conversation into 30 minutes. But we do generally finish on time. What time is it with you, Matt?
It is just after 6 a.m. in the morning.
After 6 a.m.
Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, my friend.
Good on you. Where exactly? Which town are you in?
I'm in Chicago.
You're in Chicago. Haven't been there for a long time. You like Chicago?
I love it. I mean, I've been here for, over 20 years at this point. Don't really see myself leaving. It's a great town.
Super cool. Super cool. Okay. Right. Well, I think it's 1 minute past. So let's get started anyway. So thanks for joining us, guys. Welcome to another episode of SEO in the Shed with me. I'm John Earnshaw, the Chief Product Evangelist at Datametrics. And as you can see, the topic for today, I'm going to be talking about some of the things that search data has revealed about voter concerns in a lead up to the recent US election. And I'm really pleased to say that I am joined today by two fantastic guests. We've got Matt Groch and Peter Longton. So Matt, first, do you want to just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. My name is Matt Groch. I'm a senior partner at FleishmanHillard, one of the premier communications agencies around the world. Been with the organization for almost 3 years now. A lot of the work that I do lies at the intersection of reputation management and analytics, if you will. Previously, I come from a technology background, and I have an opportunity to apply a lot of those skills that I've picked up over the years in the analytics work that I do presently.
Super cool. And I think, your experience with reputation management, I'm probably going to pick your brains on that as we go through this presentation today. So that's awesome. Peter, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, John. So I'm Peter Longton. I am Customer Insight Manager at Datametrics, which is basically a bit of a hybrid role between data analytics and customer success. So I've been working alongside you both to produce this deck today, making sure that the search terms that we're tracking around the US election are concrete to sort of pull the insights out that we've got to present today. And yeah, really looking forward to it.
That's awesome. Thanks, Peter. Okay, so before we go any further, I just really wanted to spend just a moment talking about what makes search data so special. Now at Pi, we love search data. I'm a search data obsessive, as I know you are as well, Peter. So just to put today's session into context, now recently Google described itself as the world's largest database of human intentions, and it was also Stephen Davidowitz, and Matt, I know that you're familiar with his work, and particularly his recent book, Everybody Lies, that really demonstrated in fine style that people's search for information is in itself information. So while everybody else has been turning to social data to really try and understand what makes people tick, at Pi we've been super busy doing the same with the search landscape to really try and understand intent, because after all, let's not forget that Google spends billions of dollars every year trying to ensure that the SERP landscape is a really true reflection of searcher intent. And today we're going to demonstrate how the Pi platform has become a really amazing lens through which we can analyze that. Now, I'm going to pass over to you, Matt, because the report that we jointly created, you created this amazing forward. I'd love you to summarize your words here, if you could.
Sure. So, when I mentioned when I was introducing myself, I talked about the work that I do stands at the intersection of reputation management and analytics. And I think the reason why I like to frame it that way is because This is an area that's seen a great deal of attention over the last couple of years. I think from my perspective, I would say that the inflection point was probably back in maybe February of 2018, right after the Parkland, Florida shooting, right? And all of the ripple effects in society, at least here in the United States aside, what it did is it instigated a lot of conversation with our clients who were saying, look, the dynamic has changed. We're being asked to take positions on societal issues in a way that we've never seen before, and we need a way to see around corners, right? And so, what we started working on at that point in time, we heavily invested in this idea of how can we bring data and analytics to enable what I'll loosely refer to as anticipatory issues management, right? And a couple of years later, the concern has not diminished in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it's continued to accelerate, right? COVID, the 2020 election cycle, right? We've got major brands and corporations coming along and saying, how do we navigate these waters, right? And so, in terms of the business unit that I actually operate in within FleishmanHillard, which is called True Global Intelligence, which is essentially our separately branded research and analytics unit. We're very, very excited to be able to bring into the mix, in addition to news media, social media content, a lot of the primary research work that we do, also interweaving search analytics into the mix, to help us develop a more holistic view that addresses exactly that concern that's coming up time and again in conversations with our clients. And so, essentially, this is what the introduction, really touches on, but through the lens of the 2020 election itself.
Fantastic and fascinating. Honestly, I don't know how we're going to do this in another 20 minutes. I could talk to you all afternoon. So in terms of compressing an afternoon into 20 minutes, we're going to look at 4 things. We're going to look at searches related to candidates and try to understand what this data reveals. We're also going to take a look at how we actually analyze the Serp landscape. We often talk about it, and I talk about understanding intent through the Serp landscape. We're going to see how we've done that. We're also going to discover what we can learn about our audience from the SERPs. And finally, we're going to take a look at overall visibility for target topics. And Peter's got some fascinating insights. But let's begin with highly searched candidates. And again, this is the lead up to the recent election. Peter, over to you. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so here we're looking at the 12 most searched for Democrats and Republicans, summarized in 2 trend lines from September 2017 through to August 2020. And what you can see here is that the Republican, or the interest in Republicans, was much higher up until around 2019, which was when Nancy Pelosi was re-elected to Speaker of the House. And then since then, through the presidential nomination process, the increased demand has sort of kept in line with the Republicans. So before 2019, there was around double the amount of search volume for Republicans. Since then, the Democrats have caught up, and then more recently, they've overtaken Republicans in terms of, in January, when it was all about whether Bernie would be elected as the candidate for the Democrat Party. And then in August, obviously, there was increased search volume around Kamala Harris's nomination to Joe Biden's running mate. So this data goes up until August 2020. The reason it doesn't include September is because Google started withholding search volume data for both presidential candidates and vice presidential candidates from that point. So it's going to be interesting to see if they start releasing that data again now the election has been and gone. So yeah, that's what we're looking at here, John.
Super interesting, Peter. And Matt, what's your take on this piece of data? Any surprises here?
Well, actually, I don't know if there are surprises necessarily. I think, from our perspective, certainly we've been tracking similar things over a similar time frame. In fact, I think these trends are corroborated by what we've seen in terms of volumes of news coverage, volumes of social conversation. I think that, from our perspective, we're always interested in understanding, particularly as a communications firm, what influences the influencer, right? And from a media perspective, there's an open question of how do you understand, what transitions from news coverage into the social domain, vice versa. What are the things that instigate that? I think that a similar dynamic is in play when we think about search analytics as well, right? When we think about what's inducing people to get off their couch, right? Put hands on keyboard and start looking for things on Google or whatever engine it is that they're using. What's instigating that, right? And then conversely, when they're actually taking that action on, how does that have a ripple effect back to what's being discussed in social media, and how that may even be reported on in news coverage. So those are the sorts of things that are going through my mind anyway when I see these sorts of patterns in the data here.
Fantastic. Well, let's take a look in a little bit more detail. Peter, back to you again. You pulled this one together.
Yeah, so here we're just taking the trend line that we saw for Republicans previously, and looking at the top 7 most searched for Republicans over this 3-year period. And what we can see really is that Donald Trump obviously just dominates the search volume, the search demand, the interest in the Republican Party in terms of the people that are most interesting to searchers. So he generated twice the search volume of all of the Republicans combined. And that was an average of 7 million monthly searches in the US.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, we were just talking earlier, weren't we? I remember talking to somebody at CNN last year, and they said, what's the average monthly search volume for Donald Trump? And I said, it's massive. It's 500,000 average monthly searches. And you say now 7 million?
Yeah, 7 million on average this year so far. And obviously with search volume data coming in for the most recent months as well, I'm sure that's going to go up.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's flip to the alternate view, and what do you see from here?
So this is again, we're just looking at the top 7 Democrats in terms of search volume over the last 3 years. What was interesting for me here was that Joe Biden, even though he does have the most search volume throughout the whole 3-year period, he actually was only the most searched for Democrat on 2 months of this year. And that was because at the start of the year, the search interest was all around Bernie. Yeah. And then going into August, like I said previously, Kamala Harris being nominated or being put forward as Joe Biden's running mate, that increased the search volume by 1,260% for Kamala Harris. Yeah, and former President Barack Obama was the 7th most searched for Democrat, just in front of his wife and former First Lady Michelle Obama, who was in 8th.
Huge numbers. Matt, any thoughts on this?
Well, I was just going to mention that within Fleischman, of course, we were tracking the election, right? Or excuse me, tracking exactly these sorts of patterns leading up to the election. And one of the things that we were really trying to tease apart as we were looking at the data is understand what's the difference between searches for these individuals and the actual underlying motivations for searching for those individuals, right? And I think this is a challenge that we're actively grappling with right now, if you will, when it comes to search analytics, where I don't know if I'm going to frame this in the right way, but if I was going to take a stab at it, something about a challenge in divining the motivation or the why versus the search intent or the what, if you will, right? So for example, somebody can be searching for Joe Biden, but saying Joe Biden Ukraine scandal, right? Versus Joe Biden policies, right? And those are 2 completely different motivations for searching for Joe Biden here.
Absolutely, and it's those motivations that I think gets us so interested at Pi, because we're super aware that that search landscape really is a true reflection of searcher intent, because as you and I know, and we've spoken about before, people will search for things in Google that they would never talk about. They almost confess it's digital truth serum, I think. Stephen Davidowitz referred to that white box, and that's so true. And we're working so hard to pull that data out, which takes us on to this next slide, Peter. I love this one. Tell us what we're looking at here.
Yeah, so this ties into what Matt was saying, really. Extending on what we saw previously, these were the searches that were most associated with each of the candidates. So as you go and Google Donald Trump on, these would be the top 5 most searched for things. And so we got that data from Google Trends, and then what we did is we enriched that data with Datametrics to look at the sites that were owning these searches. So obviously the sites that return in the organic position 1 are going to be having a huge effect on what people believe the candidate's belief is on these issues.
Yeah.
So what's really interesting here is seeing, that both the news sites that return for the candidates, but also in terms of Joe Biden. Joe Biden had obviously his own website where he was managing to rank in the top organic position for issues that voters associated him with, which obviously is an immensely powerful thing, because then he's owning the conversation around his stance on guns and his stance on immigration. Matt, what do you think about this slide?
Well, when I look at this information, and I look at it through the lens of, again, reputation management, I guess, there's a few things that jump out at me right away, right? So first off, of course, we see this trend in terms of the issue of reproductive rights or abortion, right? I mean, right, straight across the board, this is something that everybody's talking about one way or the other, right? There are other patterns as well in terms of, with Joe Biden, Kamala, we're looking at things like, gun control, immigration, what have you. When we look at Trump and Pence, we see issues related to LGBTQ rights, perhaps, COVID, right, so on and so forth. And I guess I mention all of these societal issues, if you will, because those are the sorts of things that jump up to me when I'm in conversations with clients who are saying, hey, we are a major national brand. We service a broad cross section of people who have different opinions, motivations, what have you. How do we thread the needle when you've got all of these issues at the forefront of people's minds, right, without alienating one constituency or the other, right? So those are the sort of, I think what this data does is it prompts questions to investigate further in order to be able to provide better counsel, if you will, in those sorts of conversations that come up time and again.
Yeah, so true, Matt. And it's that further investigation that, again, is something that we do regularly. We'll take this insight, we'll feed it back into the platform. That will reveal something else, and then we'll go on this journey, the same sort of journey that you can go through the whole people also ask, like a real rabbit's warren.
Yeah. John, I'll just mention one other thing. Sorry, there may be this question of, well, why do we need to worry about it, to the extent that we are? I just do want to mention, I think, we talked about this the other day, there's been a growing body of research, particularly over the last, 2, 3, 4 years, related to younger generations having certain expectations about brands and corporations taking a position on things beyond, just their business remit, if you will, right? And so, when we've got those companies anticipating, that next generation of consumers, stakeholders, however you want to frame them, I think it's very important for these organizations to keep that in mind, as over the next several years, that purchase decisions are going to be made more and more based on how companies are grappling with these sorts of issues in everyday life. I think that would be the headline that I would underscore, again, from a reputation management perspective.
Yeah, and I love that. And increasingly in these webinars, speaking to people, just like you, we are continuing to elevate the voice of search, to raise up the importance of search, and to continually bust it out of its swim lane. This data is so valuable. So the SERP landscape, well, what do we mean by it? Well, to anyone tuning in who's not familiar with it, go back 10, 15 years and you just got these blue links when you search for something in Google. But now there's a whole lot more. You got all these different features, images, videos, social, carousels, stuff like that. So why is it important? Well, if you understand for the topic that you care about what the search landscape looks like, then that's going to really help inform your decision on what to produce and when and in what format. Should you be producing images? What about video? What about social? And when you get that right, you can start to open multiple doorways into your ecosystem. And when you connect that together effectively, you are sending the right signals to Google. So let's take a look at some examples. And we're all familiar with this one. This is a SERP radar. Okay, so in this particular example here, we're looking at the US search landscape in Google over a period of time. And what the radar does, it actually analyzes, well, for this group of terms, say 500 terms, 50 terms, what features are prominent? Are they classic links? They're in gray. Are they top stories? What about people also ask? Because you know what? If that's important and people are asking questions, those aren't the questions they type. Those aren't the queries. These are the questions they have in their mind when they're searching. As a content producer, you answer those questions, you get onto page one, you open significant doorways into your world. So these radars, over time, multiple terms, super informative. I'm going to turn to Peter here to drill down a little bit more detail and look at the matrix. What's this, Peter?
Yeah, so this is a visualization from Pi that basically shows what the search landscape looked like on any given day. Here we're looking at the search term presidential debates between the period of the 12th October to the 25th. So after the final presidential debate on the 22nd, you can see that Google changes the search landscape to reflect the change in searcher intent. So rather than looking for the classic links, like you've just spoke about, John, searchers are looking to consume video content and the hot takes in terms of the top stories around the presidential debate, in terms of the aftermath, in terms of people's opinions. So those features come right to the top of the search results and obviously have that premium click-through rate.
And understanding this data is super important. Matt, I'm going to come back to you in just a second. You gave us, Matt, some issues, some topics, things that people were talking about. So these were, I think you gave us a dozen election issues to analyze: technology, climate change, healthcare, race. So what we did with this data, we wanted to answer two questions really. To what extent does the landscape vary by topic? And secondly, do the questions that people have in their minds, okay, do they vary by state? So let's take a look. So we've got 3 SERP radars, and I like to refer to these as reflections of intent. We've got technology, climate change, COVID-19, stretched out over the month of October, multiple terms for each of those topics, okay? First thing to notice, when you stand back, okay, these landscapes are different. And what this means is the opportunities and the approaches that we need to take as content producers are different. Technology and big tech, okay, focus on top stories. Climate change, go wide, open multiple doorways, including video. COVID-19, okay, people have got questions, let's answer those. Matt, this kind of insight, can you see wider applications for this?
Yeah, I mean, the way that this data strikes me, my knee-jerk reaction to this data is to treat it as high-level indicators, signposts, if you will, pointing, hey, dig deeper here, right?
Yeah.
I think what would be interesting is if you could take a look at these patterns of which SERP elements garner what levels of interest depending on whatever the topic is at hand, and trying to get a sense of are there long-standing patterns that you can start correlating with other types of insights. I mean, this is pure conjecture at this point, of course.
Yeah.
But that could be an interesting topic of conversation for another time. Here, looking at things through the lens of these election issues, from my perspective, I'm going to be really interested in top stories, and people also ask in particular, really to, again, try and peel that next layer of the onion back and get a sense of, if we're trying to advise clients and help them anticipate which way the wave is going to break, that's probably where I think I'm going to find much of the indicators to help craft what I'm going to suggest in response.
So agree with you, particularly with regard to people also ask, and we're going to drill down on that in a second. So let's get more granular, as you suggested, a granular approach. We're looking at climate change, and the search term, which was a popular one, global warming, climate change. Two standout things here for this search term over this same period of time. Okay, the questions that people ask vary by state. Apart from Arizona and Michigan, Pennsylvania, what are the main problems caused by climate change? Arizona, how can we change global warming? So the questions are different, but wherever you are, unusually in this case, the landscape is dominated by one provider, one source of truth, that's NASA, okay? And this is really unusual. Does this mean, okay, we could probably talk for hours on this, does this mean that if people are influenced by the content they read, are they all going to start thinking the same, and the questions that they're asking, perhaps they're going to stop being different? I mean, I think it's a big topic. Matt, what are your high-level thoughts on that?
I completely agree with where you're going with that. I mean, when I take a look at these questions here, obviously, they all share this pattern of questions that kind of indicate people want to get better informed about the issue. Okay, obviously that's fine and all, but when we start taking a look at these regional variations, things that start jumping out at me are, for example, if we look at Michigan, we look at Arizona, how can we change global warming, right? It suggests just by the use of language, that they're trying to take, maybe people here have more of a solutions-oriented mindset about the issue, right? We take a look at North Carolina, we take a look at New York. These are East Coast states. They're right next to the Atlantic Ocean. Maybe they have slightly different concerns purely because of geography, right, and different types of impacts that climate change potentially has on those metro areas right along the coast, right? And I guess all of that is to say, in my mind, I think that having these questions and understanding how they vary helps to develop hypotheses, if you will, that give you a hint of where to dig deeper as opposed to trying to boil the entire ocean, right? Particularly when we think about how much data there is, boiling the ocean is always going to be a losing battle, right? So yeah. This is the sort of data that I think is going to help you find that needle in the haystack.
100%. I love that. Thanks, Matt. So again, I'm conscious of time. We've got a few minutes left, really, to begin to understand, well, what can we learn about our audience from the search results? And there is so much. When it came to questions, when it came to those topics that you gave us, we looked at which topic had the most questions asked, and that was the economy, with questions like, who's responsible for national debt? Okay, who does the US own most debt to? Okay, and other questions. So that was the big issue. That was bigger than COVID, bigger than anything. And on the next slide, we can see some specific examples by state. North Carolina, can I file for unemployment benefits again if I lose my job? Okay, Arizona, what do I need to do to reactivate my unemployment benefits? In Arizona, I think these sort of state level questions that people are asking are fascinating. Who is dominating the SERP landscape? Well, I tell you what, it's the people who have actually understood this and started to answer those questions. Any surprises there, Matt?
You know, I'll tell you what, on the previous slide, the thing that cracks me up a little bit is, you know, the acorns.com URL that we've got here. You know, so you know, Acorn being a personal finance app, basically, right? I mean, the first thing that popped out to me is, well, you know what? SEO works. And I guess, you know, again, pivoting back to brand and reputation, you know, I guess the dots that get connected for me would be that, you know, brands and corporations, absolutely, this is indicative that brands and corporations have opportunities to leverage, let's just call it mind share, right? When it comes to these societal issues, to, you know, to better educate, right? To influence, you know, that's the key takeaway from seeing exactly this sort of data on screen here.
Love that. And I love Acorns as well. Never seen that site before, but you're right, living proof that SEO works. Now, Peter, love this slide. What are we looking at?
Yeah, so here we're just looking at the people also ask questions and the differences in terms of the candidates that we saw previously, split Republican and to Democrats, and the unique questions by state. So we've got questions on Joe Biden that are unique to Arizona, like where does Joe Biden go to college? And then we have for quite a few questions around Ivanka Trump and her nationality. They vary slightly differently by state. Some states are interested in the nationality, some states are interested in her education. So yeah, really interesting to see how that varies, particularly in these states, which we've focused on the sort of the swing states in the states.
I love that, and that's a rabbit warren we could go down for every single topic. And what I want to do now is really just to move on to show one last slide before we summarize. So in terms of who owns most visibility, you know, it's really important to understand things like who your competitors are. Okay, do they change based on different topics? Because sometimes you'll think you've just got one competitor, and importantly, who's increasing their share of visibility? Peter, this one I find fascinating. Okay, Google versus Bing. Tell us what we're looking at.
So here we're looking at the most visible sites on each search engine, excluding Wikipedia. So the most visible sites are news websites on both channels, but I wanted to include Bing as well as the second most popular search engine in the States, with I think around a 7% market share. Because Bing has a slightly different audience to Google, its audience tends to be a little older, more likely to be married and have higher income. So I thought this was really interesting just to see the differences between the sites that perform well on Google and the sites that perform well on Bing. Because I think we're all quite accustomed to, you know, on social media, living in social bubbles. But I think as well there is, to an extent, there's a search bubble based on your search engine preference. Mm-hmm. So here you can see on Google, for example, BBC are up there in 4th, but they didn't feature in the top 20 sites on Bing in terms of visibility. And then on Bing, you have Fox News in 2nd, and they were down in 16th on Google. So that obviously affects their visibility, affects how much their users are consuming that content. So if you're a Bing user, you're obviously far more likely to find yourself on Fox News consuming that content than you are on Google.
Fascinating. Matt, what do you think about that?
Well, you know, Peter, you touched on something that I think is very interesting from a researcher's perspective, and you know, it's this idea of how do we overlay audience insights potentially on top of search analytics to, again, you know, try and just get a little bit closer to this understanding of motivation, right? I mean, this is a question that like just continually pops up in my mind. I wonder if it suggests, you know, one of the frontiers in search analytics, you know, where there could be potentially a more deliberate interweaving of demography, attitudinal data, psychographics, what have you, with what's actually happening on search. I think that could be incredibly powerful. I think the data that you've got here on screen, it starts hinting at the possibilities with that sort of data enrichment, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did this for the UK as well. So this is looking at Google US and Bing US, but we looked at the UK search landscape as well for the same US election terms, and we found that Bing, the sites that performed well on Bing were almost exactly the same as the US. But on Google, it was much more localized. So the top three were BBC, The Guardian, and then The Independent. Obviously, The Guardian and the BBC also rank in the US, but they were pushed right up in the UK search landscape. So that was really interesting to see as well.
Awesome, awesome, guys. I think we're almost out. Well, we are kind of out of time. We're almost over time. How do we summarize this? Well, I think we need to have another edition of this where we go into some more detail. We talked about the Serp landscape. It's a reflection of intent. It's a genuine reflection of intent rather than social. And also it varies by topic. And we know that variance applies by state. Matt, I know you want to drill down further onto that, but certainly if I was going to create an intent-led content strategy, okay, I wouldn't get out of bed. I wouldn't do anything without that search data. Matt, have you got any final thoughts on this data and where we can go with it?
Well, I mean, I think I'll touch on some of the words I shared at the outset. The work that we're doing in True Global Intelligence as part of FleishmanHillard. We're systematically incorporating search into existing data sets that we've been using for years now to provide insights and analytics to help craft strategy, help optimize execution of communications programs and so forth, right? And I think it's an incredibly powerful data set, and we're excited to incorporate it into the work that we're doing, and we're just looking forward to continuing working with you to explore the possibilities here.
Fantastic. You know what? Thanks for everything you're doing, Matt, to elevate the voice of search. We love that, and that's why we love working with people like you. So to everyone who tuned in, thank you so much for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, there are probably some notes below. Matt, thank you so much for being with us. And
thank you.
Peter, thank you for joining me as well. The first time, I think, on this webinar. So thanks very much.
Thanks, John. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thanks ever so much, guys. Matt, thanks for getting up at horribly early hour in Chicago. And we shall see you with another webinar very soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.